What do you think of when you hear the phrase MMORPG? Probably something like World of Warcraft or classic RuneScape, right? Whatever your fancy, MMOs have taken any number of forms over the years, and considering how many of them there are nowadays, both old and new, there's bound to be a game for you. But what if I told you that to find the precursor, the predecessor, the progenitor of the modern-day MMORPG, we have to go back. Far, far back, in fact, to a past that grows more distant by the day. This is not the Neverwinter Nights you're looking for. We're all familiar with the 2003 BioWare classic, which helped to usher in a new era of CRPGs with its high-powered engine, content creation tools, and online capabilities. But it's the game that it intentionally licensed its name from that predates it within the cultural bedrock. 1991's Neverwinter Nights was the first online role-playing game to feature graphics. Yes, in 1991. Neverwinter Nights, a joint effort between Strategic Simulations, Stormfront Studios, and AOL, used the ear-splitting power of dial-up internet to let players explore the Forgotten Realms online. Many a D&D fan took to this premise almost immediately, with the game quickly growing in popularity after its release. This is in spite of the fact that it was exorbitantly, and I do not use that word lightly, expensive to even play the game. Think your monthly World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy subscription is pricey or unfair? Neverwinter Nights cost over $20 an hour in current day figures during primetime hours, and even more in certain regions. And yet, the player base seemed more than happy to pay such a steep fee to America Online, the host service. The game became home to numerous player-run guilds who, if the remnants of various forums and archives are to be believed, damn well near ran the entire game, organizing events and finding whatever reason necessary to spar with each other. One publication even claimed that the community was more important than the game itself, referring to it in retrospect as, quote, the only reason to have an AOL account. Ouch. I'm going to be brief about what the gameplay was like because, well, you can bet your house that I'm going to be making videos about the other titles in this series at some point, and such discussion will be much better suited there. Also, if you're watching a video about the original Neverwinter Nights, I'm gonna assume you have some sort of inkling as to what these games are like. The game both looked and played like every other Gold Box title, making use of the advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set. You explore an overworld, whether it's the streets of Neverwinter itself or one of the surrounding locales, and occasionally a monster pops out, which sends you to the turn-based battle screen and lets you throw down. It's a bit slow and rough around the edges, but it can't be denied that it gets the job done. Unique to the game was that it had a time limit attached to each combat turn, which I imagine was most likely a failsafe to stop one player from hogging the initiative, or perhaps scarce server bandwidth, for any period of time, and you only control one character as opposed to an entire party, with death being largely fake. When you die, you just respawn with a bit less money, which I have no issue with because this is still a Gold Box game, which means you are going to die a lot. As you might expect, a lot of what made this game unique was what was afforded to it by being online. The ability to interact with other players through an in-game chat and rough each other up in PvP, mostly. Other than that, it really was pretty much identical to the other Gold Box games. Even the general premise was the same, being monsters bad, kill them, but with your friends instead of alone. It's almost impossible to accurately describe how groundbreaking this game was. I mean, there were other online games, but they were typically incredibly small in scope, or in the case of other RPGs, text-based. It's fair to claim that this game effectively opened Pandora's box in regards to what MMORPGs would become. You've got to realize that everything you're seeing on screen was done years before games like Ultima Online, along with services like Blizzard's Battle.net, revolutionized online gaming. Don't think it was that big a deal? Think perhaps I'm gilding the lily a little bit. Retrospectively, it was honored alongside WoW and EverQuest for literally helping create what we know as MMOs. This game, legitimately and deservingly mentioned alongside two that defined and arguably continue to define the genre. Unfortunately, unlike those two gems, Neverwinter Nights isn't around anymore, with the original servers closing in '97. It is, as of the release of this video, impossible to play the game in its original form. It's a shame too, because if you're like me, then after learning about its history, you'll probably want to do nothing more than give it a whirl. It's just a fact of life. There isn't a video game more enticing at any given moment than the one you can't play. But things aren't completely lost on that front. I mean, I got this footage somehow, and it isn't because I'm secretly a time-traveling wizard. There are a few avenues which can be used to scratch any OG Neverwinter Nights itch you might have. Before we dive in, let me just preface that each of these games that I'm about to run through all play effectively as I described just a moment ago, and look very similar to each other. I'll specify anything noteworthy that's different so that if something goes unmentioned, you can just assume that it's as you expect. First off, you can just play the offline version that's still available through the internet. This version is the one responsible for the majority of the visuals in this video because it's literally just the original game but offline. Now remember, this isn't an official release, which means you've got to put on your grown-up pants and set it up through DOSBox yourself. But once you do, you're free to roll a character and explore the very large and very empty world. The biggest issue with this version is that this decidedly isn't how the game was meant to be played. Much of the combat is pretty unwieldy, if definitely doable, seeing as you're all alone in situations where there would normally be multiple players. You can't save either, because I would imagine the original didn't even have a save feature, with everything just maintained through the servers, so it's not like you could earnestly work your way through the game even if you wanted to. What this version does give you is a dev menu of sorts, letting you teleport to different areas and grant yourself resources. It's because of this that this version is best treated as something of a tech demo. Good for sightseeing, but not much more. It is worth noting, however, that the archive that hosts this version is where I got the majority of the info for this video, and is well worth a visit, even if just to read some of the old stories and insights from back when the game was still alive. For something you can actually play through, you'll want to look towards the fan-made conversion released for Unlimited Adventures. Unlimited Adventures, another topic for another video, is basically the gold box version of something like RPG Maker, being an at-home program that let players create their own adventures. It's through such a program that Neverwinter Nights was given a more proper offline experience. And yes, it is definitely that. You now get control of a full party as opposed to one character, and are free to hack and slash through the denizens attacking Neverwinter with no time limit to your heart's content. It does look slightly different, as you can tell, but the areas translate well all in all. If there is one failing of this version, it's that it unintentionally does an amazing job of showing off how little of substance there was outside of the human element. There's basically no quest to be completed, and the world is still mostly empty. It's great for satisfying a thirst for some classic gold box combat, and if that's what you're up for, then you should absolutely give it a look. It's evident that a ton of work and effort went into it, not to mention that it's just downright impressive. A full ground-up conversion for a game that had been dead for 15 years when it was released, to say nothing of making it work within a context it was never intended for? That deserves a round of applause if you ask me. Now, your last option is probably the weirdest, but perhaps the most interesting. Shortly after AOL gave Neverwinter Nights the axe, an unabashed clone by the name of Forgotten World, featuring near-identical graphical and gameplay stylings, was put into production and eventually launched in 2003. Ironically, the Wikipedia page for the original claims that Forgotten World has been offline since 2015, but here I am playing it in 2023, so 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, clearly. Maybe it was down for a time, I have no idea, but I can confirm, at least as of when this video was uploaded, that it is online. Online, of course, being the operative phrase. In that respect, considering you can actually play with other people, this is probably the closest representation to the original Neverwinter Nights available today. It is definitely a smaller game, and I had some issues finding other players, but I will fully disclose that I was not only brand new to the game, but also that I played at weird times. People don't typically camp out the starting areas at 2 in the morning, you feel me? The game does have a Discord, and there is definitely a community surrounding it. You probably just need to be a bit more entrenched than I had the chance to become during the production for this video to see it in-game. Beyond that, Forgotten World is, for all intents and purposes, the game it sought to replace. I mean, look at it. On appearance alone, it could be sold as a classic gold box game with very little issue. Many of the areas are identical to Neverwinter Nights, and there's more than a few cribbed lines of flavor text and enemy sprites. The terminology is different for obvious licensing reasons, which is probably the only drawback. This is not technically D&D, though the systems it's using are very closely related and familiar. Even still, what's what is very obvious, meaning it's not like you'll need a guide or anything to get your bearings, but I could see it being a letdown for D&D purists. Honestly, I wish I had the time to dig a bit deeper into Forgotten World. It's a really cool labor of love, and it's carrying a torch that it seemingly has no reason to, because no matter what version you choose to play, I think the importance of any of these 3 titles lies well beyond the gameplay or even the online capabilities. Let's face it, this gameplay is present in every other gold box game, and in today's world, there are much easier and more intuitive ways to play games with other people. There is very little need today for Neverwinter Nights or an adjacent program from a practical standpoint. But a game that is this important to the fabric of an entire genre of gaming deserves to be archived and preserved in some way as to allow those who weren't or couldn't be there at the time of its original release to partake in the experience. That is where these options have a ton of value and why we should all be thankful that they exist. If any of what's been shown in this video interests you, I've left links to the appropriate websites in the description below so you can check them out for yourself. Also, I know this video was kind of different, but I fell down a rabbit hole with this game and really wanted to talk about it, so if you stuck around this long, thank you. Neverwinter Nights will probably never be re-released or rebooted because there is no reason for it to be. But for the sake of history, it's a uniquely important, if often forgotten title that deserves its recognition, even in a world that has no real use for it anymore.